Well, South Africa's border management authorities say thousands of migrants returning to the country from Zimbabwe have already been processed following the festive season break, and added that several had been arrested and returned to their country while attempting to pass through the border without a passport. Dr. Michael Masiapato is South Africa's Border Management Authority Commissioner, and he joins us now for more. Good evening to you and welcome. I think the best place to start is to get your reaction to the actions by the Patriotic Alliance.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Iman, for the opportunity as the Border Management Authority. Maybe just to first start by indicating that as the Border Management Authority, we do have the responsibility as presented by Section 5, subsection A, B, and C of the Act in terms of facilitating and managing the legitimate movement of people across our ports of entry as well as the border law enforcement area. At the same time, we do work on the borderline, working together with members of the SANDF, with the static deployment of the border guards on the vulnerable segments along the borderline, and of course allowing the SANDF members to be able to do the necessary high mobility patrols along the border fence, as it were, to make sure that they counter any kind of illegal movement of persons into the Republic, as it were. But of course, when it comes to having to have an interface with a political activity, as the authority ourselves, we are not necessarily able to have a full articulation in terms of a political activity. But what we can indicate is Section 5, subsection C of the Border Management Authority Act does indicate that as we do this work, we need to cooperate with various other stakeholders, which include the border communities, which include the farmers, as well as any other stakeholder interested on issues of border management. But that interface has to do with the issue of information sharing, not necessarily them taking over and doing border law enforcement work.
Is what they did illegal?
You see, if you have a political structure that comes through to do a border management work, that on its own is as good as the people in the country doing police work. Now, if you are to look at the work that is to be done by the people in relation to the issue of policing, you will note that the people has to interface with the police. If they have an information, they should be able to give that to the police, and the police will be able to do what they are supposed to do, which is the arrest, as it were. But now, in terms of what they are doing, wherein they stand somewhere and they basically say, go and all of that, I suppose, that is an activity on the basis of law that is very much difficult to describe, because they are supposed to be interacting with us as the border law enforcement.
It sounds like you're saying, Dr. Masiapato, that it is illegal what they did.
The issue is, Iman, if we can be very much practical, we are talking here about two jurisdictions. We are talking here about two countries. We talk here about the existence of the borderline, and we talk here about border law enforcement authorities that exist. On that particular basis, they are the ones that are given responsibility by law to be able to do border law enforcement work. However, ordinary community members can then engage with us on the basis of information if they have a particular information, but not necessarily to do it by themselves.
Right. Sometimes we have to trust, Dr. Masiapato, and I'm sorry to interject. We have to trust what we see. It didn't seem like any of these provisions as provided for in the BMA Act were complied with. It would appear to our plain eyes that this is illegal. And if that is the case, is it the responsibility of the BMA or any other law enforcement agents and instruments to press charges against the members of the Patriotic Alliance doing this? And we can see, as we're showing these visuals right now, people coming over to the South African side. So for all intents and purposes, in the Limpopo River, on the South African side, on South African soil.
Number one, Iman, to note is, if you see, in terms of Zimbabwe and in terms of Limpopo as a river itself, the borderline between South Africa and Zimbabwe is in the middle of that river. So if anybody crosses that particular line in the middle of the river from Zimbabwe in this instance that person has just broken the immigration law. So that is illegal. So if anybody, including ourselves, we cannot cross that particular borderline and go into the Zimbabwean side without having used the port of entry. We also don't cross it. So if they did move into the river and they cross that particular borderline itself, they had actually broken the laws on the Zimbabwean side because they crossed that side without necessary documentation. So that is basically the explanation.
Yeah, again, for me, it sounds as if it's a really simple, straightforward question to ask Dr. Masiapato, and I don't mean to be argumentative, but for all intents and purposes, again, given the provisions that you stated, was this action by the Patriotic Alliance illegal in enforcing border management laws and regulations, and can, legal action be taken against them for it?
Yeah, maybe Iman, we can then respond on that to indicate that as the Border Management Authority, we will be looking into that particular activity as it unfolded and be able to activate our legal team and be able to look at what can be done from our side. But what I can put on record very clear, it is the law enforcement authority that has the mandate by law to enforce border laws, as it were. In this instance, those functions are described in Section 5 of the Border Management Authority Act.
All right. So it's safe to say that your agency, the BMA, is exploring legal action with regard to this matter. I want to quickly come to two issues, Dr. Masiapato, before I let you go. Claims, again, that they made, the Patriotic Alliance, that South Africa is a borderless country. And in those visuals, you can see, communities of people that are trying to cross the river. Your agency, the authority, along with other enforcement agents and officials, are nowhere to be seen there. This doesn't seem to be very far from the Beitbridge border post itself. Why then is it so easy for people to be able to come over?
Let me put it this way, Iman, so that this thing is well understood. Those particular people, as you can see them, those people are called facilitators. Those are the people who are having those boats, and those people are there to assist people who would want to cross into the country illegally. So that's the first point. It does not necessarily say or mean those are the people who are to be crossing into South Africa and go wherever. These are the facilitators. So it is these people that had enabled, or it is on the basis of this situation that made us to meet with the leadership on the Zimbabwean side to make sure that they actually help us to deal with this particular situation. Because remember, as they sit on the Zimbabwean side, there is nothing much that we could do because we cannot cross there and pursue them. But we do that all the time. Then let me clarify this other point, Iman. Our patrol is on the border fence. So if you look at the Beitbridge itself, in terms of the actual river or Limpopo, as it were, the patrol fence is behind where this the political people has done. So they have crossed the borderline and they went into the river banks. So our patrol is actually on the borderline, and on that basis, none of those people had crossed the borderline, because in any event, if they were to do that, the border guards as well as the SNDF were going to intercept them and were going to be deporting them back into Zimbabwe.
So then it sounds like you're saying they're grandstanding, right? Because if that line is behind them, as you say, they would have been apprehended anyway. This sounds as if it was a political spectacle. Would you agree with that description?
Yeah, you know what I'm trying to avoid, Iman, is to enter a bit into political issues, because we are doing the work that is more law enforcement.
Right.
Now, they wouldn't necessarily be going into lines of grandstanding or anything, but one thing that I can assure you is, by the way, if we are to talk into substance issues, the Border Management Authority from the second, as we started with the second leg of our return, with the deployment we have made, both in the port of entry as well as on the borderline, we have intercepted 400 individuals that were trying to enter the country illegally. We got them processed and we got them deported back into Zimbabwe. So that is the official work that we are actually doing.
All right, and then just to close, before I let you go, Dr. Masiapato, and thanks for that clarity, I suppose we'll hear back on developments on apprehending those facilitators, those agents, in terms of this new spirit of cooperation that you have with the Zimbabwe Border Port Authority. There was this incident, of course, early in December, around, or the latest rather, on the buses that had crossed over into South Africa with the hundreds of unaccompanied children under the group of 8. In that initial news conference, it was described by yourself as these children having been trafficked. Of course, a lot of information has been exchanged since then. Where do you stand on that matter now, and what is the status of those children, those minors tonight?
Yeah, so from where we are sitting on that, Iman, you will note that we have done those searches of the 42 buses. We had then intercepted those 443 children, as it were, and we had to have them handed back into Zimbabwe. So what we do once that actually happens, we then activate our social development department that will then interface with their counterparts on the Zimbabwean side, and they start doing social-based work, which is the work of integrating those children with their families. So out of that, the investigation in terms of the actual traffickers or smugglers, as they are described, that work is being done by the Zimbabwean Republican Police, as it were. So from where we are sitting, the report we have is that that particular work of integrating them with their families has actually been completed, and everything is going according to plan. We continue to enforce border laws, as it were, in the port of entry. And as we speak, we continue to still intercept children that are coming through without documentation, and we continue with this process of denying them to come through so long as they do not have the documents, as we also do with the adults.
Yeah. So what did you find out? Were these kids smuggled or not? Were they trafficked or not?
No, remember the issue of the concept of trafficking, that is the investigation work that has to be done by the police. Because remember, for them to be able to come to that full narration is on the basis of the investigation and ultimately the arresting of the traffickers. The main thing that we had to do was to return and also return what we call the conveyancer, which is the bus in this instance, or a taxi that brings in illegal people into the Republic. We actually charge them, by the way, 15,000 per person who does not necessarily have documentation that they bring into the port. That is why, as we speak now, we have started to turn away the buses that are still owing us money, which we have charged them for bringing people without documents into the port.
Right. And perhaps just a final thing, how many returnees do we have to South Africa, Dr. Masiapato?
You mean
from the Zimbabwe side? I mean, how many have returned to the country?
Oh, in terms of the numbers, yeah. Let me put it this way. From the first, we started with the processing of the return. We did 10,000 on Monday the 1st. We did 15,000 on Tuesday the 2nd. And we did 21,000 yesterday. So from up to this point, we will say that we have actually processed over 46,000 people back into South Africa as part of our return leg from the 1st. The figures for today and over into the other days, we should be able to continue to update, as it were.
All right. Thank you very much for your time tonight. We appreciate it. Dr. Michael Masiapato is South Africa's Border Management Authority Commissioner.